Let's talk about
Let's talk about baby. Let's talk about and me. Let's talk about all the good things and the bad. Man, we've been having some fun lately, haven't we?
Yeah.
We're working on a new project.
Yeah.
Can't wait till we can talk about it.
We can talk about
Can we talk about it? I don't know.
Why don't you just give a little
tiddly,
Okay, next
little
week.
tiddly biddly. Well, listen, it should be out in, I guess we got about 5 weeks. It might be out sooner. Secret URL. Only we know. I was wondering this. Can
Maybe
you
we'll
can you like look and see all the URLs that are registered to a person and then like find out what URLs they own?
There's like a Whois database, so you can search like domains, but they do like this privacy thing, which is like,
Oh, that's right.
you have it's basically like
Proxy.
It's like a
lawyer in
physical
Delaware.
It's a physical form of a proxy.
Yeah, cool. Reverse proxy lawyer in Delaware. Hide all your URLs. Anyways, we're not going to be talking about it this time, but we have a new project we're working on. It's related to videos and websites.
It's gonna be awesome.
It's gonna be so awesome.
It'll be a secret URL, and maybe we'll like release it to like podcast listeners.
That's a great idea,
Just we'll
actually.
drip it out in all our little channels.
That's a great idea.
There's nothing worse than listening to a podcast where the hosts are like, I have a great story, but I can't tell you about it. I'll tell you. It's like you just feel like you're not in the room, you know?
That's true. We don't want to give them digital blue balls.
One way to describe it.
Well, it's basically we have a video website. We have a video website, and we've been talking about our video course and about doing it as like a Gumroad one-off purchase. But we decided, you know what, we want to get back to our roots, our Ember Map roots. This podcast used to be called the Ember Map Podcast, where we talked about Ember, and we still kind of do sometimes in the sense that it's related to the work we've done. We've been doing Ember for a long time. Some listeners are OG Ember fans, but now we're kind of broadening out, and we renamed this podcast to Front End First, and our website with videos, Ember Map, is basically the first stage of this new project. So that's kind of what we're working on now, and I think in about a month we're going to have some cool stuff to show everybody. So I'm really excited about it.
Super excited.
Yeah, there's an early stage project. Adrenalines, the late nights. I was up till like 2:30 last night. Couldn't help myself. Playing around the logos, playing around the framer motion. I've got more tools to distract myself now than I did 5 years ago when we started Ember Map. So it's a little dangerous. But let's go ahead and talk about some real hard technical topics here. What do we got going on today?
Let's talk about TypeScript and GraphQL.
Nice.
Because it's something I set up this week, and it was a pretty fun journey. So
cool.
I think how do I start this? I think I don't know, a month ago or so, we saw like some videos with TRPC, and it was really cool how you get it's like end-to-end type safety. So you have like your Prisma schema, and then you get that basically like those types flow all the way down to your React components. So like from the database to React, which was awesome. Like those videos were awesome that we saw.
You have like a string first name on your user table, and then like you're writing client-side JavaScript, and it's like user.firstname.
Yeah, and it knows it's a string.
Yeah,
so
and it knows
all
it's a
the
string.
string functions work. And I think the biggest thing for me here, it's like one thing I've kind of realized about TypeScript is like this might sound stupid, but like I don't really care about type safety. I care about editor autocomplete.
Right.
And so that's like when I saw that feature of like database to React code auto-completing everywhere, I just knew I wanted that.
Right.
And we've been using GraphQL with Hasura for like the past year or 2 years maybe. And so when we see this like autocomplete stuff, we're like, there's no way that can't work for GraphQL, because like Hasura has a GraphQL schema.
GraphQL itself is typed.
It's typed, yeah.
I mean, this is like before TypeScript was cool. When GraphQL came out, it was like, and we've been through all sorts of eras of JSON schemas and validators where, you have a payload, but like you still have to validate it and know what you have and what you don't have. ORMs, both in the client and the server, try to protect you from this. But, JSON is like the Wild West. HTTP is the Wild West. And so that stuff was always a leaky part of the abstraction, right? Whereas when using Active Record and Rails, you don't really care the format of the data that comes back from SQL. It's going to be wrapped up in Active Record models, and you're going to be good to go because that stuff was like airtight.
Yeah.
But we're making our own SQLs on the web via JSON APIs.
Yeah, we're crossing this HTTP boundary.
Yes.
Like, how can you possibly know it's so low level? How can you possibly know what's coming over? Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So the GraphQL being typed was a cool thing
Yeah.
because it addressed this. And the GraphQL spec is so complete that if you have a server that doesn't respond correctly to the request in the typed way that it's supposed to be, at the server level, it's going to say this was like a badly formed request, or I don't have these attributes. Whereas we never had anything like that in any API that we wrote ourselves by hand before.
Right, because they're all ad hoc.
Exactly.
Just, I'm just going to throw this property on here.
Exactly.
Okay, cool.
So that's how that's kind of like the first time we were introduced to like typings over the wire in a sense. You know, even when we were doing mocking with Mirage, it was like you could load up GraphQL server, GraphQL JS, and get something that said like, oh, you have a bad request. Whereas every JSON API app we ever wrote never had that.
It wouldn't the server at the edge at the boundary.
Go back 8 years.
Yeah,
no edge.
At the boundary, the server couldn't say this is a bad request. The server would just take the request, hand it to your code, and then your code would just error because you sent a string where it was expecting a number.
Exactly. So just like we've been learning with TypeScript, the most valuable way to use TypeScript is to enforce types at the edges, at the boundaries. And so you have the type safety going through the program. In the same way you want this, but we didn't have it before. So you'd have those loose types kind of going through, and there would be a problem because it was your server. I mean, how many consulting projects we worked on where the guy who's working on the Node server is like sending a bad version. It's like pluralized instead of not. It has an underscore instead of a camel case, and that's causing problems everywhere.
Yeah. Yep.
So GraphQL was really cool for that reason. For us
because you
beginning.
catch it right away, right as the request. Okay, cool.
Exactly. And then it enabled tools like Hasura, which we liked because you just create the database and the relationships. And then because it has a schema, it just gives you a schema. And now I know exactly what requests I can make and exactly what data I get back. So what you did was basically took that across the finish line and bring it into TypeScript.
Yeah. So the first thing I did was we write our GraphQL statements like using like the GQL helper. So like you can import GQL from like GraphQL request or from GraphQL. We do it from GraphQL tag.
Yeah,
it's like
tag,
a template. It's a template function.
Right.
And VS Code can know that this is like GraphQL, so it syntax highlights what's in there, and then you can pass that to basically your GraphQL hooks.
Use SWR.
Yeah. I'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
But the first thing I wanted to do is as we're writing that GQL stuff, I want that to autocomplete. So, and one of the reasons for this is Hasura gives you, when you set up Hasura, you say like, I have an episodes table, and it's going to give you all these functions like find episode by ID, all episodes. Like that's what Hasura does. It takes your database and gives you a whole bunch of GraphQL query resolvers that map to database tables. So there's so many Hasura functions like insert one, insert many. Like I don't know them all off the top of my head, and I certainly don't know all the tables we have in our apps. So I want all that stuff to be able to autocomplete. I want to be able
when
to
you're
type,
writing your query.
when I want to type query and then like EP, and then I want it to just say, okay, here are your queries on like that begin with episodes.
And that's the way it works in like graphical on hosted Hasura.
Yes.
So what we usually do is, or what I do, at least my side projects, and like on the admin site that we work on and stuff, you go to, okay, I need to make a new page where I show the episodes. You go up to graphical on your Heroku instance, and it's like a hosted, it's like an admin panel. It's like it's like graphical. Yeah. And yeah, it lets you write typed GraphQL queries.
And
so you wanted that in code, basically.
Yeah. And to be fair, like I think I'm still going to use graphical. Like,
because
graphical, it's like a UI. It's a UI. It promotes like discoverability. Like there's drop downs that you can expand and click and scroll around. So I think that's really nice. Where it's hard to, I think it's hard to bring all that into an editor, even if you have autocomplete.
Right.
Just being able to kind of just see everything.
Right.
So anyway, to do that, to set that up, this was actually like really easy to get the autocomplete in GQL tags.
That's crazy.
So there's a VS Code plugin extension called GraphQL Language Server.
Okay.
And I already had that installed, and I think the reason I had that installed was so I could get like syntax highlighting for my GraphQL statements. If your project has a it's like GraphQL.config.js or GraphQL.config.json. You know how every config file has like 15 ways to name it. Yeah, exactly. There's one for GraphQL. It's a JSON file, and you have a schema, and you just point it to it. It's like the key is schema, and the value is the schema.
Okay.
So I downloaded the schema from Hasura, which Hasura makes super easy to do. They have a command called graph. It's like a combination of like GraphQL and curl. It's like
GraphQL.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
It's like a curl client for GraphQL. So they just
point to the root GraphQL.
Exactly.
Of the URL of the server.
And you can get the schema.
That's awesome.
And so I wrote that to the project.
Nice.
Created this GraphQL config file. Said schema is schema.graphql, which is in the root of the project. Done.
That's it? Really?
That's it. So
oh my gosh.
So auto completing as I'm typing GQL queries.
Wow. Yeah. So even if you did like your workflow like I do on like my fitness app, which uses GraphQL, where I go to graphical, copy over the thing, you still want that because it's typed. If you had a typo, even if you never use it for discovery, it's typed. You know if you have a bad query. If you change something and you re-download the schema, you would know if you had a missing attribute, or if you just want to add an attribute, you can just control space and like see everything. That's unbelievable.
So that's where it was most valuable. Is I already have my query written. I got it from Graphical like 3 months ago when I wrote it. But like, I actually want to like add, what was that field? It's like YouTube or YouTube ID, and like just enter, control space or whatever it is.
Yep.
And just
that is awesome.
Yeah. Also, like, I mean, I was like, this should be harder. Like, I should have.
It's
had to
literally
have done
like
a lot
a
more for
string. It's like a template string. It's like a big chunk of string that is like conforming to some spec. How is TypeScript and how is VS Code going to know?
GraphQL Language Server.
So you can basically write like a TypeScript type.
So we're not in TypeScript yet.
Okay, gotcha.
This is like
gotcha.
the same way that your JavaScript language server knows that like you can like autocomplete JavaScript functions.
Got you.
That might be a bad example, like Ruby or some JavaScript's like the least typed language I've worked with. But you know what I'm saying? Your editor knows stuff about your code.
Right.
So
cool. Okay.
So this was super.
So it's not going to type error your program.
No, it would. I think I did get like the red squigglies if I did something that like wasn't there. It doesn't inspect your schema.
It's a VS Code problem, but if you ran like npx type check or whatever, npm run type check.
Yeah, I'm sure there is a command line GraphQL
checker.
I know that like ESLint. I haven't set this up, but I know that ESLint it's able to like integrate with other language servers. Yeah, so it wouldn't surprise me if there was like a way to get linting feedback here. But yeah, that was really cool. So the next thing I wanted to do was, once I have my query, be able to hand it to use SWR and basically have type information on the object I get back. So if I pass a query that gets all blog posts, I want to be able to do like, data.posts.map post and have it autocomplete post.title, post.id, and all those goodies. So this was like
a little more work.
Definitely like a lot of research, and I asked a bunch of people, and it was so funny. Like the range of answers in this space is extremely wide. The two things I found were the first was GraphQL codegen, which I'll get to in a second because that's what I ended up using. The other was this thing called Zeus, and there were a few things like Zeus, but Zeus seemed to be like the most popular one, where it basically takes your schema and generates a whole bunch of TypeScript types from your schema, and then they have a client that gives you basically like their own client. So you're not writing GQL statements anymore. You're using a client, a JavaScript client. So you write all your GraphQL queries through like a JavaScript ORM. And that thing has types based off your schema. So you can imagine you're writing JavaScript queries that are going to a GraphQL server. They are GraphQL, like if you squint hard enough, you can see the GraphQL resemblance, but it is all JavaScript.
Got you.
And that was kind of like, that was kind of the end
Bridge
of the line.
Too far.
Yeah. I wanted to write, first of all, we have a bunch of GQL in this code base, but also it's like a big ask to use someone else's client.
Yeah.
You know, kind of like the, what if this thing becomes out of date? Now I have this old client. So,
feels like an unnecessary dependency.
yeah, I think like, you know, I like the, how kind of like open and innovative the GraphQL space is, that I can use SWR, I can use Apollo, I can switch those things. I'm still using GraphQL at the end of the day. So locking into a client was kind of like, yeah, this just isn't for me.
Right.
The other thing was GraphQL codegen, which I ended up using, but like kind of the path to get there was like a lot of ups and downs, in that like I didn't want to use it at first. In fact, we had used it on a previous project, consulting project, and I remember having a really bad experience with it. So GraphQL codegen, they have this awesome blog post that's like GraphQL and types over the years, and they talk about like at the very beginning, you would just write all the types in your app. Like, I want to use TypeScript with GraphQL, so I'm just going to like, I know my GraphQL server is going to respond with like a post with ID and title, so I'm just going to write like literally interface post, ID, number, title string in my app, and then I'm going to pass that around. Like when I get data back from my GraphQL client, I'm just going to say as post, and so now I get that type information. The next kind of thing,
like, and that's like a duplicate source of truth, basically.
Yeah,
because it could fall out of sync with the source of actual source of truth, which is the database schema.
Yeah, the GraphQL server.
GraphQL server. Yeah.
It's also, you just have to maintain it.
Right.
It's like a lot of work to maintain those. Like for something like Hasura, remember Hasura gives us all these
bunch of stuff,
and so I can't. I can't.
Yeah.
I can't type that fast.
Yeah.
The next idea was basically generating those types automatically. So that's like the first phase. The second phase is, in a few years later, generating those types automatically from a schema. So I have a schema. I can just generate the post type automatically, and then
you run a command.
Run a command, exactly. And then inside of my code, whenever I'm working with a post, I'll just say as post. And it's nice. It's kept up to date. The only downside there is that I have to write as post everywhere, right? I have to like lie about my types. I have to typecast. So it's really easy to miss one of those.
Got you.
Just, it adds a lot of boilerplate, and it's like human boilerplate.
Right.
So then the next phase, and I think this is when like GraphQL codegen got really popular, or at least this is like kind of my takeaway from exploring this, was we're going to take your GraphQL schema, and we're going to take any queries you write in your app, and then we have a set of known GraphQL clients. Like we know about Apollo, we know about React Query, just a whole bunch of GraphQL clients. We know about Vue, Apollo, all these things. We're going to take all the queries you write, and we're going to generate hooks that will map to your queries.
Oh, interesting.
So this was what we used on the consulting project.
That's right.
So if I write a query called all blog posts, and there will be a hook, use all blog posts, that basically, and it knows we're using Apollo. So we load an Apollo plugin.
Right.
And so it's going to do the Apollo query, return any errors, return the data.
Right.
And the nice thing about this is it's typed all the way through.
Right.
So I'm not lying about types anywhere. I'm not making up types.
Right.
It knows that it's a post query. It's going to give me a use post hook. Since it's generating that use post hook, it can just assign the return value and the type.
So as long as that's the only interface with which you interact with the GraphQL server, the generator hooks, then you have type safety from the boundaries, basically. Yeah.
So this, I know in like my experience using this, we would get we ran into problems where like one component would define a all post query, and then another component would define an all post query, and they would just clash. And it was hard to figure out. Sort of the answer here from a lot of people are like, you shouldn't be defining queries at a component level. Just have a queries folder that has like all posts in it, so you know you only ever have one. But for us, we're like, I like starting a project, being in one file.
Exactly.
I think a lot of people that were making this argument were basically like, I work on a big team. I want to control all the queries. Like this was like a feature to them, where I would look at this as like, this is just too much work for us.
Yeah. It makes sense too. Like if you have a bigger app, you want to share queries, but the co-location of queries with the component was one of the like touted benefits in the original release of GraphQL. So just like we would start a new app in one file, we did just do that, and we would write buttons and duplicate them until we needed to. There was more pain from the duplication than abstraction. We wouldn't abstract a button in a components folder until then. I also wouldn't want to abstract like an all post query into a folder until I needed it, until there was some motivation for it.
When I write that all post query, it's like that is a query I'm writing for this component right here. I don't want it to be globally available.
Exactly.
And so starting it off on the globally available thing,
it's just
yeah. And again, type of apps we work on, this is the approach we want to take. Bigger apps.
I mean, I think I would even be strong. I think I would even word it stronger than that, because I think co-location is important for maintainability of apps, because in a setup like Ember or Rails, where they originally had the global folders, the file system doesn't give you any indication about what should be used and shared, and therefore where it's okay to like introduce new coupling versus where it's not. Whereas in like a modern app, like a React app that lets you co-locate things like components, it's good because it's basically letting you put more things into private API effectively. If I'm writing a new page in the blog and there's some CSS that I see on a customer's page, I'm not going to reach in to do it just because I'm not going to do it. But if there's a global style sheet with those, I could just use those too. Now you've introduced coupling, you've made it harder to refactor, you've basically have more public API service area. So
you lose the relationship between your GraphQL queries and your components.
Exactly.
For sure.
Exactly.
Kind of like another thing here is like the auto generation of hooks feels a little strange. If I have a use like all users hook, I might have a query in there, and then I might have some like other code that runs.
Right.
Making my use all users hook just be a wrapper around a GraphQL query just kind of adds a lot of hooks, and then like I might end up like importing a bunch of those hooks, composing them into a new hook.
Right.
There's just a lot of naming here, a lot of hooks like that. This is the kind of stuff that like I try to keep out of my code base. But this is just a me thing.
Yeah. No. I think that's totally reasonable. I feel the same way too. Like, also things that it always feels like things that are auto-generated, you're doing it for the sake of the computer, because why is that not just an API that you call, as opposed to like a new function that is written for you and then invoked by you? Like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly.
You would think if all it takes is the computer to generate a hook, a function called get all episodes, you'd think, and that's because you have a query called all episodes, you'd think you'd just be able to call something from the library and pass in a key of all episodes. Doesn't feel like you know what I'm saying? It feels strange that you have to generate code and then call that generated code.
Yeah, I think this is a way, like what I'm talking about here is a way to get it to compose with like Apollo's use query hook.
Yeah.
So it creates a new hook called like use all users that then calls use query with your all users query. Yeah. I think if you're using like purely like GraphQL requests, you can combine them into a new interface that's like client dot all users, stuff like that. So but again, it's like it's just code gen,
it's strange.
And just again, that's like a taste thing. Yeah, but it's just the kind of stuff like, and also too, like I am probably jaded by this project we worked on where there were a million of these things and it was impossible to debug, and it also slowed down the workflow. Like you actually would type a new query, save it, and then you'd have to wait for the stuff. The editor would go red. Yeah. Then it would work. A couple seconds later, it's like very, very painful to work in that kind of environment. So I think they called in GraphQL CodeGen's blog post this auto-generating hooks, auto-generating code was, I think this was like the 2020 version. I love that this is not the end of the story. Yeah, me too. Because I thought this was the end, and I was like, I don't want to use GraphQL CodeGen, but there were some awesome answers here. Nice. So they have kind of like the next evolution of this is this thing called a TypedDocumentNode. And before I go into that, let's talk about what a document node is. So when you write that GQL query, like when you do like GQL backtick in your GraphQL code, GraphQL tag is going to return a document node. It's like a data structure that represents your GraphQL query. And like, there's like benefits to this. Like, it's easy to parse and inspect, and you know, it has all the information about your query. Like, imagine if you just had a string. It's easy to send a string to the server, but like to do any sort of like introspection on that, you'd have to like
Parse it.
it.
Basically, it parses the GraphQL query.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
puts into like
a
an
data
object,
structure.
a data structure.
And so that's exactly what a document node is.
Cool. Okay.
But document the GQL type is basically document node.
Okay.
So it doesn't know the difference
Between a document node that has all users query and a create subscription mutation. Or
exactly.
Whatever. Yeah.
Exactly. So what TypedDocumentNode does is TypedDocumentNode. It's GraphQL codegen. It scans your project, finds all your GraphQL queries, and then creates a file with all their types. And so if I have a GraphQL query called all users, I now have a type in my project called, I think by default, it's called all users document. One of the things I did is I renamed it to all users. So the name of my query I said type, it's actually a JavaScript object with type information. So TypedDocumentNode takes all your GQL queries, creates the actual document node data structures in a file with type information. So if I had a query called all users, I could import all users from
Import type all users from.
no, I could. It's an actual JavaScript.
Oh, okay,
object.
it's an object.
So I would write query all users, and then I could import all users from like my GraphQL queries. It's just an auto-generated file.
Yeah.
And then part of TypedDocumentNode is they give you a bunch of TypeScript utilities, which are like those TypeScript helper functions, like pick and omit. You know, the things we've used. The two that are really cool are variables of and result of.
Oh, cool.
And they take a TypedDocumentNode.
Oh,
so I
cool.
can do variables of
Nice.
all users, and it will tell me exactly what all users are. And I can do result of all users, and it will tell me exactly what the result of the all users query should be. And this is like the beauty of
That's
GraphQL's
cool.
type. Yeah. So I wired this into SWR, and I tweeted this, and it's like I have a generic that's the document node, and then I do like, you know, I have like T extends document node, and then this function now returns result of T, and one of as its second parameter, it takes variables of T, and that's it. Now all my SWR all use query is all typed.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's really cool.
That's crazy.
Really cool. I'm just there's one more layer here. So I was so impressed with this. I tweeted this, and someone that works at, I think it's like the Guild is the name of the company that maintains GraphQL codegen. Someone replied and they said, we're working on this thing, a new preset where you don't have to import
the thing.
from the file. So this was
That would be awesome. So right now the workflow is basically you set this thing up and
I can give you it, yeah.
Okay.
So he showed me this code, and I got this wired, and it's the same idea, but instead of
Importing.
it's freaking genius. So instead of importing a JavaScript object that's typed that you can now pass to like your use query thing so that you can get the result of it, what they do is they override your GQL function. And they override your GQL function, and they say, when your GQL function is called with your all users query, it's going to return all users. When your GQL function is called with your all post query, it's
When
going to
do
return.
they do this? How do they do this?
They do it at build. So there's like a codegen. So it's still a GraphQL codegen.
Yeah.
So there's still a codegen step. So, but
How do they do the swap? I mean, do you import GQL from something else?
you import GQL from you import GQL from a file
that was generated by
that was
codegen.
generated.
Okay,
So-
got you. Okay.
But for me, I just have that alias to like GraphQL.
Yeah,
so I
yeah,
import.
yeah. Got you.
Not GraphQL. I have it like at lib GraphQL.
Yeah. Okay.
So I import GQL from
The generated file.
from the generated file, and then based off which query I'm passing to it, they just know the return type. So there's
How? They just
because that GraphQL, if we open up that
File.
it's literally, you know how you can like overload type.
Yeah.
So you're like, when full name is
type of
called with Ryan, its return
Yes.
type is Ryan. When full
Yep.
name is called with Sam, its
And they've
return type
parsed
is
the
Sam.
document notes. So they know the name of it in the beginning.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it's like you're importing one GQL file, but it's like its types are like almost like when it's called with this is its type. When it's called with this is its type.
Got you. And that's why they need to generate it, because there's no way to write a generic in TypeScript that like parses a template string and then returns a data structure based on that.
So I'm like, I
That would be crazy.
yeah, this is like one of those things that's above my pay grade. And like the
Yeah.
back of my head, I'm like, someone can figure this out.
I mean, can
right?
you even do like, yeah, you can see, TypeScript can see if you pass in like Sam or Ryan. Can it see if you pass in like 0, 1, 2, and then can you like split by comma and do different things? You know what I mean?
Yeah, you can say when this is called with 0, 1, and 2, this is a return type.
Yeah, but you can't do like
So literally
arbitrary. Like this is going to be called with like a string that's like number comma number, and I'm going to return like the split of string, and then it's going to be like a tuple with whatever you put in as the first and whatever you put in as the second. That's a level of generality
runtime.
you would need.
You need
exactly.
You need to actually
it's
evaluate the thing.
exactly. It's based on the thing you pass in, but the thing you pass in is so complicated because it needs to be parsed by a GraphQL parser in order to even be turned into a document node.
Yeah.
So that's like why they run the generator. But it would be interesting. In theory, you should be able to do this all at runtime. As you said in Slack, you were like, me as a programmer, a human, I can look at this query and know exactly what I get back without any intermediate steps. So in theory, you should be able to do this.
Look at the query, look at the schema, and
Exactly.
I can tell you what I get back. Right.
Exactly.
Right.
So there shouldn't have to be any intermediate artifacts, but obviously there's limitations to how powerful generics are. So
it might also just be easier to like like generate all the types and then overload the GQL function with all the different queries that can be called.
But anyway, so you were going to say so that's what. Okay, so that's what it is. That's the end.
So that's what I ended up with. So there's no change to how we write GraphQL. You still create a variable with GQL, and then you pass that variable into use SWR.
And the arguments are typed too.
Yep, arguments are typed.
And the return value is going to be the full document node, and you don't have to import anything different. You just that's crazy, dude.
It is awesome.
That is awesome.
So if
I want to try it,
if you
I
have a
put that in my
required
fitness app.
Yeah, totally. If you have a required variable that you miss,
Yeah.
and also this is really hard with Hasura because you know how Hasura has like update by PK,
Yeah.
and you pass like
They have some
underscore
weird
set,
names.
and
Yep.
then you have to like give it the
Yes.
PK you're updating by.
Yes.
Reasons for all this, but as a human, it's just hard to remember these.
Yes.
That just
Wow.
get the red squigglies, fix it.
I love to hear it. That's really cool. This is beta code you're using, or like?
So I think from like this GitHub discussion, what I just described, that final stage is what GraphQL CodeGen wants to move to, because I think there's like some benefits for them. Like you can use this with any GraphQL client, where before they had to know you're using GraphQL and
Apollo or SWR or whatever.
Sorry, they had to know you're using Apollo, and then they had to write like a code generator for Apollo. There was like an SWR code generator, but it wasn't official, and I don't know who maintains it, how well it's maintained. So being able to use the types, it's also like
that's dope.
It's just easier. Like I have types with my queries, and I can get the types back from my queries. I don't have to generate a hook. I don't have to generate runtime code. I can just use the types.
Right.
Yeah, which was awesome. And
that's
then
dope.
as a last step, I set up Zod. So this was cool. I didn't actually get to like, it's hard for me to imagine a use case when this would have saved me, but I have this, and it was really fun to set up. So I take the GraphQL schema from Hasura, and I generate, GraphQL CodeGen takes the schema and generates a whole bunch of types. It overloads those GQL queries, but also types everything in your GraphQL schema. And then I take all of the queries and mutations, all the types from the queries and mutations, and I create Zod schemas from those. So Zod schemas are like, it just says like I have a JavaScript object and it should have a first name that's a string. And with Zod, you can go really far. You can say I have a first name that's a string that's between 3 and 20 characters, and but for GraphQL doesn't provide that level of granularity
Right.
into a string. So it's just, I have a first name that's a string.
Right.
That Zod schema, you can then run at runtime. So it's almost like a validation object. So I made an SWR middleware that anytime it sends out a query or mutation.
Oh, wow.
It's
I was just thinking, where would you do this?
Well, I originally did it in use query.
Yeah.
But then I was like, man, now I got to use this all
Everywhere.
Use mutation.
Because this is like the Elm thing where you want
the boundary.
You want the boundary so that when your data is in your system, you're not working with anything that's weird.
Right. Use query is a pretty good boundary. You can't make a query without use query.
No, but you could get data back from your server that you don't want to deal with.
Well, that would come back through use query. So that would be like use query.
But that's why the middleware is nice.
Yeah, the middleware.
Yeah, that's what I was
very nice,
thinking. Yeah.
So anyway, I moved it to a middleware. So
Right. Use query is the first time you touch the network. You do something right after that, but this is even better because
now you have it in use query, in use mutation,
yes.
anything that invokes your fetcher.
Yeah.
So So when a query goes out, it knows what the query is. And when the query comes back, it validates the response against the Zod schema. And if first name whatever changed from a string to a number and you didn't update your types, Zod will throw and say, hey, I had a schema for a user and I thought first name was going to be a string and it's not.
Right.
And so you need to deal with this.
That's cool.
And my error message is you probably forgot to update your types.
Yeah.
So go re-download your schema and get it into the project.
Right. Interesting. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I'm surprised that it works so easily with like the generated thing too. Like it's nice composition story that it works with the resulting types from codegen. Because normally you would just integrate it at the lower, like in the first level, right? Like if you were just adding Zod to a project that used GraphQL with GraphQL request, you know what I'm saying? But the fact that it works with the codegen side of it too.
The codegen generates the types.
Yeah.
And then there's a project that does like TypeScript to
Zod is
Zod.
Okay, gotcha.
And that's why I had to add.
Got you. Right, got you. Cool.
It's funny. Most people that use Zod are actually going the other way. They write their form validation logic in Zod.
Yeah.
And then they're like, oh, it'd be nice if I had types. And it's like there's you can just do like z.infer from Zod to TypeScript.
Got you.
But I was going the other way because I had the types from GraphQL.
Yeah.
Now the funny thing is like most of the time like my GraphQL schema, I think I haven't run into an issue where like this Zod would have saved me.
Yeah, because
but I think I can contrive a few issues, so it'll be fun to see now that this is set up. Like where
well, you can also correct me if I'm wrong, but with Zod you can add more sophisticated requirements that go beyond GraphQL types.
Yes, you can.
Because GraphQL is primitive types, and then you can make your own types, like a movie or whatever, and then you can say, an actor has many movies, and like their actor.movies property is an array of my movie types. But ultimately, they boil down to the primitives that are in GraphQL,
which are simple,
right?
So like from
string, number, Boolean. Whereas Zod, you could say, like the project we're working on at work, you could say, oh, this is a quote that's like of type 1 and it needs an author. This is a quote of type 2 and it needs a statistic. And you can't really encode that. Like if you're quote type 1, you have to have an author. Whereas if you're quote type 2, you have to have a statistic. You can't really encode that into GraphQL type.
Right.
If they both have like quote type and like author and statistic. And it's like you can do that in TypeScript where you'd say if this is 1, then statistic is a never and author is a string. If this is 2, author is a never and statistic is a number, something like that. So you can do that in Zod.
Right.
And so that's where it could save you in the sense of like, let's say you're editing the data in your backend and you have like an invalid video, like your video is like of type lesson, but it doesn't belong to a series. And like for whatever reason, you can't encode that in the database because in the database series ID is nullable because not all lessons belong to a series. But if it's type lesson, it has to.
Right.
So you could do that in Zod. Right. And it would catch something like that, right?
Yes, you can. I think this kind of going full circle here brings us back to like the original, how do we get types in GraphQL?
Yeah.
And now you're writing those things yourself. And so what if like your database validations change? Like
What's the
there's
source
like
of truth? Well,
yeah,
that's
there
like a
could be-
layer. It's like a business layer on top of the root types. So I wonder if like you still would want, if like episode ID, series ID is nullable, then like Zod should know that already. But then if you say something else, oh, if series ID,
you can create your own business logic.
Yeah.
But that's something like
That's different.
You have to write-
You would do that after
Right,
the
you have
Zod
to-
layer.
yeah, or maybe I would just have a middleware that says,
Yeah.
hey, anytime I get back a lesson query from GraphQL, like validate it against the Zod lesson schema, which has a whole bunch of our business logic. But that can't be, from what I was doing, like I wanted to just auto-generate everything. I didn't want to write anything by hand.
So okay. So your Zods. Okay. So yeah, that feels like what would be a scenario where that would save you? Because if it's literally auto-generated from your types,
someone changes, so
you don't update the schema.
Yeah, exactly. So you're working, and I just go into GraphQL.
Yeah.
The GraphQL server you're querying, and I start changing types. You're like going to be downloading.
my types are a lie.
Yeah, exactly.
At that point.
Yeah. So your types are a lie, so you get no feedback in your editor,
Right.
but all of a sudden your JavaScript starts blowing up and says,
Right.
cannot call to uppercase on.
Well, I guess there you would, before you merge, you would make sure you download the latest schema. Oh, but it could be after you deploy.
Yeah.
So you could, I was thinking
throw-
when you merge, when you PR and you're ready to deploy, part of the test is CI would download the latest schema from Hasura, run type check, and your GraphQL code generator plus Zod would catch anything that if your template, if your render function said person.first name and it became person.name. So that would be okay.
Mm-hmm.
But if you deploy that and then you change first name to name at runtime, you're going to start having runtime errors. But if you have Zod there, if you didn't have Zod there, like there's no TypeScript at runtime, right?
Right.
So that wouldn't help you and you'd have an error somewhere. But if you had Zod, you could set up an error handler for a Zod validation that didn't pass.
The thing is, if you change first name to name, the GraphQL server would catch that before you even got to Zod.
Oh,
The query level that would get caught. So
well,
like,
let's just say you say
first
nullable,
name.
nullable.
Yeah, that's a good
Nullable.
one. Nullable.
And it's always a Boolean or something. It's always a number, but now it can be null. And so you're calling like to int on it. And so you make it nullable. Your types are not there at runtime, so that doesn't help you. But you have Zod there now, which gives you like an error at that level, and you would know right away that
I'm about to bring this data.
your schema's out of date.
Right. I'm about to bring this data into my app through an SWR GraphQL query, and you told me that
It's always going to be a number.
It's always going to be a number, and guess what?
Right.
It came back null, and so you need to deal with this. And it's really nice that you actually get the error.
Yeah.
Right there, because otherwise, think about how that error shows up. It flows.
Oh, yeah.
That null flows down through a few components, and then one of your leaf components just explodes. With,
Yeah, no, totally.
Could not call what's a number function? Could not
To
add
int or whatever.
something like that. To string,
non.
whatever. Parsing.
No. That's actually it's what you want because you have two apps, and so just because you've deployed, or you have services, really, you have your app, which is always going to be. It's always going to be in line with the types in it. Like in our code base, it's always one app that's deployed as a single app. But since we're talking to a database server, it's basically like what would happen if you change the schema? And I mean, what happens when you start a Rails app and you connect to a database schema? Like you can make an alter table statement.
Yeah.
And if you did, your Rails app would start blowing up because when you boot up a Rails app, it reads the schema at boot time and generates the active record stuff, and it knows what's available. And if you did an alter table statement to SQL after the Rails app had started, you need to restart the Rails app. But I'm sure this has happened where someone didn't, right? There was Rails apps running on Heroku, and I mean, there's all the zero downtime deploy stuff, right? This is effectively the same thing. It's just that people aren't going in and changing the schema to SQL as willy-nilly as maybe people do when they log into their PlanetScale or their Contentful or their Hasura and just add a field or whatever. But it's the same idea where it would actually be nice if in Rails, if you knew, oh, you just made a request to, user.all, and I can't read this, and I can't hydrate these active record models because the data coming back from this server is like not what I expect.
Yeah. You want whether it's Rails or JavaScript, you want the error right there.
Yeah, exactly.
I can't hydrate this.
Exactly.
I can't put this data into the system. What you don't want is I'm just going to put this data in and just let it flow through a few components, and then one of them might blow up.
Yeah. That's good, man. That's good.
Yeah.
It's a principle that keeps coming up over and over again.
Yeah.
It's the same with the types. It's just, you want to look at little bomb shelter and all this stuff there.
Boom. Exactly. Bomb shelter.
That's you don't want to have to worry about that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. It's something where I do want to, I had some questions like, should I actually run a Zod validation here in production? Because once my code's in production, I don't want it to like blow up in front of a user at that layer. Like,
well,
maybe
that's
it should. Maybe it should try to flow through
because
because
there's a better chance it will just be like it'll show up as like a undefined.
Exactly.
UI
it shows up undefined. Yeah, like literally like a false or an undefined gets rendered.
But maybe you get a warning. You log it and then you let it keep going and see if it can recover.
Yeah. So like in development, you actually throw and get that error modal.
Yeah.
But then in production.
So the other approach here would be basically the Rails approach, which is no one. Sure, you can SSH into your server, connect to your SQL server, and then run an alter table statement. And that'll blow up your Rails app, but that's like not Rails' fault. What normally you do is you have your Rails server and your code base. And when you make a change, you do it from the Rails side. So the Rails is actually code base is actually the source of truth. And if you want to change the database, the way another programmer knows if programmer A has changed something is that there's new code in the same way they know there's new code.
Yeah.
So the code becomes the source of truth for the database. This is how you could solve it here. Whereas instead of opening up Hasura and making a change, you start from the code and you basically create migrations from within your app. And you can do that.
Hasura has a workflow that's like when you're working on like a big production app
with multiple people.
Yeah, like this is a workflow you should use.
Yeah.
I think what you said is absolutely correct, but at the end of the day, like there's more and more services, more and more people using Contentful, and all it takes is just anyone to go into Contentful. I mean, think about it. Contentful's made for like marketing people, not programmers.
Yep.
Someone goes in there and renames a field.
Yep.
And your code base has generated types that are now alive. I mean, it's
They're
kind
live.
of funny that as soon as you generate your types,
they're out of stale. Date. They're stale.
Yeah.
Potentially stale. Yep.
Yeah, potentially stale.
Yep. I know. I was thinking about that. It's almost like you want to like grab them at runtime every second. You can imagine grabbing it. You can imagine at least grabbing them at runtime instead of generating them. So when you start your app, you hit the server, you read them into memory, and then that's what you're using. Or like a temp file. It could be. It's effectively from the programmer's perspective, it's memory. So if I restart my server npm run dev, I'm getting the latest from the GraphQL server.
So this is a good segue because when I wired all this up, I'm not running GraphQL codegen on every file save. I just have a command that generates
Does it once.
But that means that
if the database changes.
Or if I just edit a query. Remember all like the GQL is overloaded based on my query. So if I edit a query, I have to rerun it, which is obviously like not ideal. I want this to be auto run.
Yeah.
But this kind of introduces something. It's like now you're running next, and now what we're also I guess we're going to run GraphQL codegen as like a side process.
Yeah.
That watches. They have like a watch mode.
Yeah.
So just we're just going to run like npm run dev is going to be npm run parallel next dev and GraphQL codegen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's an npm project.
Yeah. Yep.
There's an npm package that lets you run multiple npm packages.
This is the kind of stuff that
I don't like. It's if it slows down, if you're coding and just trying to paint, it's a real bummer. If you for whatever like when we were coding last night in the new site, you're just in a flow and you want to alt tab, and if you ever alt tab, you don't see it, and you come back and you realize you did it a little bit too fast because there was some generated thing that was asynchronously happening after you saved it. That's like you never want that to happen.
Also, too, just
pretty
like,
bad.
Just like Next.js is so ridiculous. Like before I command S to save, and before my eyes can like even move from the browser, from the code window to the browser, like Next.js is already hot reloading
I know.
everything.
It's
so
insane.
Like, if there's like, wait, did it reload
I
or
know.
any of that? Like that's a non-starter.
Yeah,
so.
I agree. It's interesting. Well, you could do it where
If like you only
you could do it like at the CI level or something. I feel like there's a way to use this if you wanted to make sure. I guess the benefit of the typings are during development.
Yeah. People, when I raised this, some people said, "Look,
I feel like
you're not editing GraphQL statements enough for it to matter." And part of me was like, some made a comment that said, "It's not that big of a deal. It only takes like 20 seconds to generate."
Oh my god! Now, if you got what I would prefer actually is you edit the GraphQL statement and you get a little red underline, and then you have to go to your terminal and say gen types or npm run gen, and then once the red underline goes away, boom. And that way, when you're doing CSS and all this stuff in React, you're not worrying about it, but you get feedback that you have something out of date.
Yeah.
So maybe there's a way to do that.
Yeah, it might be nice to have like VS Code.
The watcher could not necessarily run the generator right away. It could just let you know. That's like what I would want, I guess. Somehow let you know. I guess it would have to generate things.
I don't mind if the watcher always runs if it's out of my way. If it's like deleting files and changing types. Yeah,
exactly.
VS Code is like picking up the deleted file.
Yeah.
But in my
experience,
kind of 2 days of experimenting, it was fine, and it was way faster than when we were doing it to generate the hooks.
Project.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
But this is a thing where, like, in my notes to do, I have like figure out a way to like auto run this, and in a way that's also too like, I love that I can run npm run dev in any next project, and if I start seeing codegen and other stuff, again, it goes kind of just back to like what we were talking about earlier. Like, I know that totally works for some people, but for me, I just like simple
convention of configuration, stick with the stuff. We've seen so many apps where you come back in and this little thing that you added is now causing problems. It's little paper cuts, man. There's little frictions. They really suck. You only need like 4 or 5 of them to like shoot your day down. Like, you were going to make this change and now it's like, oh, there was this little thing that you did, or even like you're on the wrong node version. There's no node version, so you don't know. Oh man, how long does that take you to figure it out?
It's flow. It's
some experimental feature doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, it's just
we don't want any of that in our projects. It's important. It matters to developers.
It's all tabbing.
Yeah,
going to Twitter.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just the flow of just
and the way
out code is like just don't get in the way.
You're like 100x more productive.
Yeah,
and the way to do that is to stick with like the defaults as much as possible. Cool. I think that's like a good place to wrap this up. I was wondering if we're going to have time to talk about TRPC more, because now that we've had some experience with TypeScript, I've looked at that. This guy Theo on Twitter and YouTube really likes it. And our buddy Hassan has talked about that too. He was telling me he had kind of one of his rants about why he doesn't like Hasura, and we like using Hasura a lot. And I think it had more to do with like mapping your API to your database one-to-one is like not the best thing. Hasura does offer some abstractions there if you need to do that, if you need to hide things from the front end. We've done that before. But I was more interested in talking about it from the TypeScript DX perspective, so maybe we can talk about that next time. But I love that like your approach is exactly how I would approach it too, which is like basically weren't interested in like adding TypeScript to these side projects of ours. And apps that we run on the side, like until it basically didn't really cost that much in DX,
Yeah. Well, I want the DX benefit.
You want the DX basically be the same.
Yeah. Dude, the autocomplete.
Autocomplete is awesome. Well, not the same, better, but for no cost. Right. No trade-off in terms of now you have to import this thing every time and add these type annotations, blah, blah, blah. So this is pretty cool that you ended up with a solution that's like what's the functional programming term?
Referentially transparent. Yeah. It is. The PR is cool because like that, the only thing that changed
the app code is like the same.
The app code is the same. It's just the generics in use query using like result of and variables of, and and getting that TypeScript generated file.
That's
the
very
GQL
cool.
overloads. But yeah, I like
That's really
it,
neat.
and I think just we'll see what I say in 6 months.
Yeah.
But I think it's cool. So
That's awesome. Cool, man. Great job breaking that down. That was neat to hear the history of that. And I just, it's like Redux, man. I was happy to watch from the sidelines and not get into any of that. So I never did any of those early painful TypeScript things, but that's really cool. And it sounds like the team is maintaining that is like doing a really good job of communicating and
I think
keeping
so.
it up to date and stuff. So that's awesome. Cool. All right. Well, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
See ya.
Bye.